I wanted to get your opinion on this because I feel like we've been having, we talked earlier about Harden and the Lillard thing is still ongoing as well. Do you think it's a problem for the NBA that we're seeing these trade requests where a guy specifically demands to go to one team?
I do. And I understand the both sides isms of it, where the players should do whatever they want to do. But my issue comes into play when these actual one team trade requests wind up like really dictating the market to where other teams are scared out of bidding altogether. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's just what happened with OKC just going after Paul George anyway, even though everyone knew he wanted the Lakers, or the Raptors going after Kawhi. I don't think teams are as emboldened to make those risks anymore. And that's what sucks about this, because I think it's well within a player's right to request a trade, to
Mm-hmm.
try and dissuade teams from trading for them. But if it's now reached a point where because they're doing this, and we think these players wield so much power that even when they have 4 years left on their contract, you're not actually going to fork over value to make a realistic bid at them. Now you're not just dictating where, you're dictating for how much as well. And I think that's really problematic in large part. And again, I understand the player empowerment of it. I can't bring myself to care about that side as much when we're talking about the 5% of the NBA when we're speaking about player empowerment. And two,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more important that teams in these non-glamour markets, however you want to say it, I think it's important that the Thunder, that the Pelicans, that the Raptors, that the Hornets, that these teams view themselves as being able to go out and trade for these players because they know they're not, I mean, no one's going to sign them in for agency anymore, but you're not going
Mm-hmm.
to let these preferences dissuade you actually going after them and trying to keep them again, especially when they're under contract. Now, is it different because Damian Lillard is so old and the number on his contract, 4 years, 208 plus million, is borderline prohibitive, where teams might not view that as an asset? That's sort of an interesting wrinkle here. But it even comes back to the Pascal Siakam stuff, where he's on an expiring contract, so it's different. But I want teams who operate outside the lexicon of player X wants to go to the Lakers, Clippers, Knicks, or Heat. And it's really the Lakers, Clippers, or Heat at this point, it feels like. Maybe Celtics you could throw in there,
Mm-hmm.
or one of the New York teams. I want those teams to get involved on these sweepstakes. And the fact that it feels like they're not, and maybe the Damian Lillard stuff smacks me in the face with it where he gets sent to New Orleans or something. Uh, but just like, I think that's the biggest problem for me. I don't know where you land on that. And by the way, trade requests, I don't want to say they're inherently a good thing, but they do drive interest around a league that has built a lot of the intrigue around player movement. And so there is value in having these trade requests. It's again when they're so limited is when it
Yeah.
feels very problematic.
Yeah, I'm exactly in your camp. I asked because I have a quiz going live at Forbes about this tomorrow, where I say it's like kind of a big problem. I would say probably one of the bigger problems in the NBA right now, because for the teams going through this, like Blazers fans and Sixers fans just want to pluck their eyeballs out right now, especially Sixers fans having now gone through this twice in the last 3 years. Ben Simmons did not try to dictate his team. In fact, I believe at one point he was like, I will play for any of the other 29 teams, just not the Sixers. So it's slightly different there.
We need
But
those trade
again,
requests more often.
I know. But that's
Anywhere but here.
I agree with you. Like having the agents, Dame's agent has come out and said, I'm telling teams not to trade for him. And it's clear that Miami's offer, as currently constructed, is not good enough. Otherwise, Portland would have already said yes. And so they're trying to find a third team or a fourth team for Hero, which makes sense. Um, but I'm with you. Like I think the happy medium is, yeah, totally. You can request a trade. That's great. I mean, there's something in the CBA that says you can get fined if you publicly address it, even suspended, which I think would be very funny to see. Like, we'll see how serious the NBA gets about this. Like, I don't think they're going to suspend Damian Lillard for this, but we'll see. But I think the problem of I only want to play for this one team. Great, you should have just become a free agent. Like no one forced Damian Lillard to sign that extension. no one forced James Harden to pick up the player option.
If the
But
reporting's
again,
accurate,
because
he basically forced the Blazers to give him the extension. I don't feel bad for the Blazers about that, but he actively sought it out at least. And I'm sorry to even interject, but I know where you sort of land on a lot of the morality issues outside of basketball. And I'm curious how you feel when people say, well, like if this was someone else who is in the workforce, they're going to try and maximize their earning potential and still look for other jobs. I know how I feel about it, where I just think it's insulting to compare what these players are making to,
yeah,
the middle class. But I'm just curious, how do you reckon, like the devil's advocate argument of, well, why shouldn't players be allowed to do this? And it's kind of just like, one, is the argument just, well, you can't compare the two, or is it just because now it's prohibiting teams from throwing their hats into the ring to actually get these players anyway? That's when it's become problematic.
I mean, if NBA players were at-will employees that could be fired and, given 2 weeks notice and laid off, then sure, by all means, go search for whatever team you want to go to. But that's not the case. Like, I worry that, especially with these one-team trade requests, that these superstars are basically just like negating the value of contracts. And I think it has trickle-down effects, that affect front offices and people like other players on their teams. Like, would Portland have traded for Jeremy Grant knowing that Dame was going to ask out? Would they have re-signed Jeremy Grant knowing that Dame was going to ask out 12 hours later? The Sixers right now are in this weird limbo where they're like 10 million under the second apron. They have their full $5 million taxpayer mid-level exception. If they didn't have to worry about what's going to happen with James Harden and how much money are we taking out or taking back and sending out, they could theoretically, like, maybe they sign Kelly Oubre Jr. or Christian Wood to a $5 million contract right now, but because they're in this limbo, they can't do that. So, like, superstars drive the league. I get it. Like, they are, underpaid relative to their production, and I am sympathetic to all of that. But, like, this is the system you agreed to. The CBA dictates the team can trade you. It's like, why is it fair that they could be traded and they can't ask for a trade? Because they agreed to it. If they didn't like the system,
it's right in the name.
Fight for the right to be able to do that. But then I think, like, my bigger concern is just if stars continue to do this one team thing, like, at what point do owners start to get fed up? And, like, do you start running into, are they going to start trying to, like, go after guaranteed contracts? Like, are they going to stop fully guaranteeing all contracts? But, they're like, what's the point? You've got 4 years left on your deal, and you're telling me you want out, and you only want to go to this one team. Why am I even signing you to the contract in the first place?
Yeah, and again, I'm never someone who's going to side with necessarily the people who are owning the teams, but this isn't just about the Blazers. It's about this idea that there's a more of a competitive equilibrium in the league where you want a team like the Nuggets to exist, and they were unique because they gave their core time and they never made like the ultra big swing. Aaron Gordon was like the biggest trade acquisition they made. But like, you want teams, like, what if teams start stepping back from that, where they don't even want to go after the Aaron Gordons of the world? You would want a team like the Nuggets, who's really good, to feel emboldened to go after an A+ name if they have the assets, if they feel, or maybe it's an OKC would be a perfect example. If they feel like they're ready to compete, we know that they don't feel that way. And so that's what I take issue with, is because the league at large, you want all these teams to have the belief that they are operating on a somewhat equal playing field, because that's what drives this entire fucking thing. And if
Right.
believe that the only path for them to win a title or to compete with the heavyweights is to draft and develop and then win within a very specific window before their own players start to request out because they haven't won, like, it's just, what are we doing here at that point? And that's why I personally take exception to this whole thing.